secret.
Here's how to choose the perfect bet size on every street by asking just one question. Okay, to be fair, disclaimer, this isn't going to work for every scenario, but it'll get you 90% of the way there. We'll talk about the exceptions later. Let's jump in. We'll start with the flop. I ask one question to choose the perfect bet size on the flop.
You ready?
What's the biggest size where they raise their strong shit, but still call with their weak shit? Let me show you. So we've got pocket nines on the button here in a 2-5 game, 700 effective. We open to $20. The big blind, who's going to be the villain in this hand, he calls. Flop is Jack 9 deuce. Pretty good for us. We flop middle set and it checks to us. So how do we determine what's the biggest size where they raise off their strong shit and still call with their weak shit? We can get away with going a little bit bigger if we are deep, if the board is wet plus dynamic, or if the player is super passive. We want to go a little bit smaller if we are shallow, if the board is dry and static, or if the player is super aggressive. All of that well and good. You just want a shortcut. You want an answer. So I will give you the shortcut. Usually in single raise pots, heads up, I like to start off with just around half pot on the flop. If we bet around half pot here, our opponent is going to raise off if they have a really strong hand. If they have pocket twos, if they have Jack 9 suited, even if they have a hand like Ace Jack occasionally, they're still gonna put in the raise. So when our opponent has the top of their range, which we cooler, they're going to put in more money for us. So we essentially get the big bet from our opponent, but also the nice part about betting relatively small here is our opponent's going to continue with a bunch of stuff that we have essentially drawing dead. Hands like pocket eights, pocket sevens, ace 10 of clubs. And if we can get our opponent to continue with their weak shit and still raise off their strong shit, that's really good for us when we have pocket nines. Now let's look at the same example when we have an airball bluff, right? So we have 7-6 of clubs here. And in this particular situation, I would want to bet the same size, right? Because if we bet relatively small on this flop, what's gonna happen? Well, our opponent is going to raise off, just like we talked about when they have their very strong hands, and we just go
bye-bye.
But let's continue pulling that thread. Let's ask what happens if. Well, if our opponent is raising off most of their strong shit on this flop, what does that mean when they check call and the board runs out blank blank? What's the best hand they can have getting to the river? Maybe a hand like Ace Jack, maybe a hand like King Jack. That's pretty good for us when we're bluffing, since we are going to be bluffing into a much weaker capped range. And here is a little bit of sauce for you. The best bluff is the bluff where our opponents call the flop, call the turn, and fold the river. We don't need to get them to fold now when we're bluffing. We actually want to get them to call a couple of times and then fold later. So when we have bluffs here, we are also going to start off with a smaller size on the flop to entice our opponents to raise off the top of their range. And when they continue, they're gonna have more of a wider, weaker, capped range. The spot where this might not work quite as well is on super dry static boards like Ace 7 deuce rainbow or Ace Jack 4 rainbow. Because on those boards, our opponents may not fast play their very strong hands because the board is so locked down, it's so dry and static. But this does work on the majority of boards. We can talk about those exception boards in a different video. For now, let us move on to the turn. Hey guys, just really quick, if you're enjoying this video, please hit the subscribe button. It helps us out a ton, and it also helps you because think about it. If more people see this video, people will get better at poker. They will learn more poker strategy, which will make poker games worse, and therefore you will earn less money. The question I asked to choose the perfect turn sizing.
Here it is.
Are they capped? If yes, bet big. If no, bet small. Let me show you. So we have pocket nines again, and now the turn is a 4. Our opponent checks. We would ask, is our opponent capped? Well, in this situation, yes, our opponent is capped because they would raise off pocket twos or Jack 9 suited at a very high frequency on the flop. There are a few exceptions, but in most cases, the best hand our opponent could have here is a hand like Ace Jack. So the answer is yes, they are capped. And when they are capped, we want to bet big. Why would we want to bet big when they're capped if they just don't have many strong hands? Well, let's ask this. If our opponent has a hand like Ace Jack, King Jack, Queen Jack, are they folding here?
No.
If they have a hand like Queen 10 suited, Ace X of spades, or King X of spades, are they folding here?
No.
So we want to go big on the turn to target all of those inelastic hands that aren't folding. And since our opponent is capped, they don't have many of the very, very strong hands in their range. They're not going to put in more money for us if we bet small. So we may as well bet big here and just target the inelastic portions of their range that are going to continue as a call, whether we bet 1/3 pot or whether we bet 150% pot. Same exact situation when we have 7-6 of clubs here. When we have complete air, our opponent isn't folding Jack X or flush draws or open in straight draws, we may as well pile in more money on this turn with our bluffs to get the value from the portion of his range that's always going to call turn and then going to do a lot of folding on the river. Remember, once again, the best bluff is the bluff where they call the flop, call the turn, and then fold the river. So now let's look at the turn, the 3 of spades. And we ask, is our opponent capped? And in this situation, no. Our opponent can have a lot of flushes on this turn, right? When you bet small on the flop, do you think most live players check raise too much with flush draws or check raise too little with flush draws? I think most of us would agree. In general, players are going to skew more passive when playing live, and they're going to do a lot of calling with their flush draws, which means they get to this turn with just a lot of flushes. So we ask, are they capped? The answer is no. And so we're gonna want to do a lot of small betting here. With pocket 9 specifically, we probably want to bet small again here to target hands like ace jack, king jack, queen jack. We don't want those hands to fold. Even a hand like pocket 8s with a spade. And if our opponent does raise here, if they do have a flush, we have enough stack depth behind to call here and try to pair up and cooler them on the river. Also, if we did have a hand like ace 5 of spades here, it makes a ton of sense to bet small as well, because if our opponent has a flush, they're going to raise and put in more money for us, and we're still going to be able to capture value from the weaker portion of their range, like Jack X or pocket 8s with a spade, and we would love for those hands to call on the turn. So we're capturing the value from the weak portion of their range, and they're going to put in more money for us with a flush when we have a flush here. And again, with our airball bluffs here, we are also going to want to go small. The reason we want to go small here with a hand like 7-6 of clubs is when our opponents raise, well, they're just gonna have a flush at a very high frequency. We can just say bye-bye. But what does it mean when our opponents call? Well, since we bet so small on the turn and our opponents didn't raise, getting to the river, they're probably not going to have a lot of flushes. And also by betting small, it allows our opponent to continue much wider on the turn. So they're just going to have a lot of Jack X, pocket 8s or pocket 7s with a spade, queen 10 with the 10 of spades. So our opponents are just going to get to the river wide, weak, and capped. And what that means for us when we get to the river with 7-6 of clubs and they don't raise the turn, well, we have a very, very, very profitable bluff on the river, because we know with a pretty high certainty that our opponent is not going to have a flush at a high frequency. And finally, let's go to the trickiest spot for most people, the river. How do you choose the perfect bet sizing on the river? Well, here's the question I ask. What would I do with the inverse?
What would you do with the inverse? What the hell does that mean?
Let me explain. When I have a value hand, I ask what size would I bet as a bluff? And when I have a bluff hand, I ask what size would I bet for value? That's a lot of words and you're probably still confused, so let me show you. So let's go back to pocket 9s here. We overbet on this blank turn. Our opponent's called. We get a pretty innocuous 3 of hearts on the river. What is our hand here? We have a value hand. What would I do with the inverse? What would I do in this spot if I had a bluff? If we had 7-6 of clubs here and our opponent flipped over ace jack, I would think,
oh shit, I don't want to bluff that hand.
If I go all in with 7-6 of clubs, I would feel horrible because I don't think our opponent is folding ace jack. Aha! All of a sudden now, look, we have the perfect size with pocket 9s because we wouldn't go all in with 7-6. Well, with pocket 9s, we should be going all in to target ace jack, king jack, hands that we don't think are folding when all the draws brick on this wet board. So what does that mean with our bluffs? With a hand like 7-6 of clubs here, we don't want to go all in because we think our opponent isn't folding a hand like ace jack or king jack ever. So does that mean we should just give up with 7 high?
No!
Look, we definitely don't want to go all in here, but what if we chose a small size? What happens if we go small here? Our opponent gets to the river with lots of hands like ace X of spades, king X of spades, queen X of spades, queen 10 suited, 10-8 suited. If our opponent just folded those hands, now our bluff is instant print. And sure, we lose a little bit when our opponent turns up here with Jack X, but that's okay because we're getting a bunch of our opponent's range to fold here. So when our value bet size wants to go big, our bluff size probably wants to go small. All right, let's look at the example where the flush came in on the turn. We bet small and our opponent called, and now we have a blank on the river. So now we have pocket 9s. I would ask in this situation, what would we do with 7-6 of clubs? First of all, what is our opponent's range? Well, our opponent probably doesn't have a hand like pocket deuces that would raise off on the flop. They probably don't have a hand like Jack 9 suited that would raise off on the flop. They probably don't have a lot of flushes because those would mostly raise on the turn. So our opponent here getting to this river has lots of hands like pocket 8s with a spade, queen 10 suited, 10-8 suited, quite a lot of Jack X. So in this particular scenario, we have pocket 9s. I would ask, what would I want to do as a bluff? If our opponent flipped over, what's the best hand they can have here? Probably a hand like ace jack, right? If our opponent flipped over ace jack and I had 7-6 of clubs, do I think I can make him fold?
Yeah.
I do think I could make him fold, because in this scenario, the flush came in on the turn, and a 1-pair hand doesn't feel quite as good. So if I had 7-6 of clubs, I'd probably go absolutely huge here. I would overbet to get our opponent to fold everything. Since my bluff wants to go big here with pocket nines, we should probably go relatively small to target hands like ace jack, king jack. So in this situation with pocket nines, I would go relatively small to make sure ace jack or king jack don't fold. And now the flip side here with 7-6 of clubs, we have air on this river, and with our value, we would probably want to be going small. So with our bluff here on this river, well, our opponent, the best hand they can have is ace jack. We think we can get that to fold nearly 100% of the time. Let's just put in the big boy bluff here, go for the massive overbet, and get our opponent to fold almost every single hand they have here. So I know what some people are going to say.
You can't have your bluff size and your value size two different sizes.
Why? We just showed 2 examples, and in one example, our value size was big and our bluff size was small, and in the other example, our value size was small and our bluff size was big. So it's not like this is some one-size-fits-all strategy where you're going to be doing the same thing on every river. Most people are never gonna figure this out. Even if you told them your exact strategy, 99% of poker players still wouldn't make the right exploits against you. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and hopefully the shortcut for one question to ask on every street helps you guys improve your bet sizing and skyrockets your win rate.